Hello, everyone. 10 a.m. on the dot. We'll let a few people join us for a minute or two, and then we'll get started. Hello, Lewis. Thank you for joining us. We'll give it about a minute, and then we'll get going. Okay, minutes up. Oh, first of all, welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me and Ted's Coffee Hour, where we're going to talk about we'll quickly review how to do the first pass at a college list, and then we will go through how to make it really good and what work has to go into it. All right. So to start, probably the most important thing to take away from this is that your list should be a list of colleges that are the best fit for you and not the best name that you recognize. When you think of it, there are 2,700 four-year colleges in the United States. The ones that sound familiar are the top 27, the top 1%, right? Those are the Ivies. Stanford, Northwestern, Duke are academically very rigorous and very, very selective colleges. In addition, you also know the ones that have D1 football and basketball programs. Those are the colleges that you've heard of. The reason they put so much money into football and basketball is because they get famous that way. And the more famous they are, the more likely they're going to receive applicants. But that's not necessarily what's best fit for you, although that's certainly a criterion. Certainly, it's true that D1 football colleges tend to have more school spirit than those that don't have. But that's not a reason to pick it above all others. It is just, hey, I want to go to a school that has good school spirit. So that's looking personally and having insight into yourself and figuring out what is it that I want out of my college experience? And that's how we get to good fit. One other note I'll caution to that is I don't like to use rankings because it's really, really easy to fall into the trap of, hey, I want to go to a highly ranked school. It should be highly ranked by you, not by somebody that doesn't know you at all, doesn't know what your interests are. And so part of this, and if you saw the email, part of it is developing self-awareness to figure out what is your interest? What do you want in your experience? So for that, what we want to do is develop some criteria for what you want that college experience to be like, right? So think about, and for each criterion, you want to think, is this a deal breaker or is it, nah, I'd like to have it. So if I'm choosing among three colleges and one of them has this attribute, then that probably gets extra points and that's okay. But having that self-awareness is very important. So where do you start, right? Start with a really basic things. Think things like where location of the school. And there are lots of things that go into location, right? Certainly the weather varies depending on where they are. There's distance from home. And actually, I would modify that one. It's ease of transportation. My best example is my two daughters. One went to Amherst, and the other one went to Barnard in New York City. Uh, with the Amherst student, it was always dicey whether she would make it home for Thanksgiving or not, because even though Amherst is only 2 hours west of Boston, there's no infrastructure between Amherst and Boston. So there's no like train you can take or bus you can take that's convenient to get you to the airport. So she flew out of Hartford, Connecticut, which is fine because there was good infrastructure and it was only about an hour away from Amherst. but it's a smallish airport and it snows 3 inches and they close it. And there aren't that many flights. And she couldn't fly direct to San Francisco. So she always had to go through Chicago or Philadelphia or Washington, D.C. And then in the winter, that was always dicey. Her trips were always 12 to 14 hours. And there were a couple times where she almost had to spend the night somewhere. The opposite, even though she was almost as far, actually, oh yeah, almost as far away, was in New York. My other daughter lived on the west side of Manhattan, and she was 20 minutes for the Newark airport, which happens to be a United hub, and so San Francisco. So she could hop in a lift, be at the airport in 25 minutes, and then catch the next flight, of which there were a dozen every day, just on United to get her to San Francisco. So for her, it was always easy to get home, and she could come home anytime she wanted. So think about that is does that matter? Do you want to go away? Then there's also the cultural side of location, right? I went to school in California, and for graduate school, I wanted to go experience the East Coast. I just wanted to understand the differences in culture between the East Coast and West Coast, and I learned a lot. It was interesting to see another part of the U.S. Um, so those are kinds of the kinds of things that location affect, right? It's the weather, how easy it is to get home or get there, and if you want to go experience a different culture, it's different people. So that's a fairly straightforward thing to think about. The size is also something to consider. I was just talking to a student that's at UCLA right now. She's a rising sophomore, and and her experience is shared by many large, especially public colleges, which is her biggest stress is not her classes, but signing up for her classes and getting the classes that she needs to make her major. And she's going to be a marine biology major. Um, and so she's taking the bio program, but everybody that's taking any kind of bio has to do the same requirements. And so it's very competitive to get to those classes, and it's stressful. You have to be on top of it. The fun part is that there are a lot of classes at big colleges. Smaller colleges won't have the variety of classes, but you will get to know your professors much better. So this eventually is going to reach out. We're going to get to the point of you need to think academically what you want to do because that makes a huge difference. But I'll leave things like pre-med for a little bit later. Um, so think about size, right? What kind of environment do you want to be in? Um, I often kind of put them in three categories, right? Sort of small, medium, and large. And small, I kind of define by every time you walk through campus to go to class, you will see somebody you know. If you drop your books, somebody who's going to stop and help you. It's just a small campus, somebody that you know, you see them all the time. In a medium one, that kind of happens, but mostly you're seeing strangers, right? It's a medium. Um, is if you're close to your dorm, yeah, you'll probably see a lot of. If you're at the opposite end of campus, maybe you don't know anybody there. So it starts to get broken up. And obviously in large, the answer is you can walk between classes and not see a single person that you know. It's just a sea of people. Those big classes that the big universities have, you'll see it in an auditorium with 400 or 500 people. You might not know anybody at the beginning. Hopefully you'll get to know some people. But think about that, right? What do you want your experience to be? Obviously, cost is an issue. So if cost is going to be an issue in your family, then think about that early on. In-state public schools are generally the cheaper. If you're in California, that is one of the best values in education, going to Berkeley or to UCLA or any of them. It is one of the highest quality public institutions in the country. And if you're in-state, your tuition is half of what it would be if you're out of state. But then start thinking about financial aid. And I won't spend a lot of time on that right now, but you should know that every single school has a net price calculator. You can usually just search for the initials NPC and the name of the university, and it will get you to a calculator where you can put in your information and they will tell you roughly what kind of financial aid you would get. Um, there are often two kinds of calculators. One that's really basic that you can do literally in 2 minutes. Another one that asks you for a lot more information to be able to tune it to your family a lot better. So do either one, but they will vary dramatically from school to school. So that's a tool you can use to just think about that. If there's an upper limit, let's be aware and figure out if there's an upper limit, is it absolute? Or if there's an upper limit and it's Harvard or Stanford, you'll figure it out, right? Um, so let's keep on. All those are fairly objective things to look at. There's then the next part is, what are you interested in? I have a student right now, for example, that's very, very interested in continuing to play beach volleyball. So and it's not a big deal, but not every school has a club beach volleyball, um, or a club that plays beach volleyball. He's not going to good enough to play on a team, sorry, on a D1 team, but he loves to play and he really wants it to be a part of his experience there. Now, it's not a deal breaker for him, but it's something that he's searching. I have another one that's another student that's very interested in automotive stuff. So he's looking to see that there's a Formula SAE team at the college. And that's kind of a make or break for him. In general, for him, what happens, he wants to be a mechanical engineer. He wants to work on combustion engines. Um, and so colleges that have good programs in the automotive industry tend to have Formula SAE teams. So it's working out for him, but it is something that he's doing right now in high school and that he really wants to continue. And that has given him a lot of practical experience. So he just feels that should be part of his education, and totally fair point. Okay, other thing to think about is what do you want, what the universities generally call student life? What do you want that experience to be like? So one, we mentioned already, school spirit. I had one student who visited TCU and SMU in Texas. And he said at SMU, everybody was walking around and they were wearing college sweatshirts, but there were many SMU ones, of course, but there were a lot of other colleges. And so it was kind of a mix. And he was a football player, so he was very interested in having good school spirit and support of the football team. Then he went to TCU, and everybody was wearing purple. It was just sea of purple wherever you went. And he just said that's just a quick indicator of the kind of school spirit there is. It tends, as I mentioned, that tends to be focused around football and basketball, successful programs in that. But there are a few that fall out of that, and they still have a very good school spirit. Within that category of student life are things like dorms, food, um, other activities that are available on either on or right off campus. And the Greek system is part of it. So do you want your experience in college to be influenced by a Greek system or not? And that doesn't mean, yes, I want to go join a frat or a sorority. And if you do, great, then look for that. But if you don't know, some colleges have a social life that's absolutely dominated by the Greek system. And if that's something that's attractive to you, then great, go for it, look for it. That might be a detraction for you. You're just not interested in having a bunch of fraternities throwing parties every day because you're going to get distracted. And you might decide, no, I don't want to be at an institution where all the social life is dominated by the Greek system and sort of not, if I'm not a part of it, I don't get to enjoy that. That will have a big influence on your social life at any university. Okay, type of campus. And by that, I mean, is it in the middle of nowhere? Is it in a city like NYU and in Manhattan? The only way you know that you're at NYU on the campus is because the buildings around you have purple flags. Other than that, it looks like any other part of that neighborhood, and you would never know. And that's very, very urban with all the goods and the bads. Urban, there's lots of stuff to do. Clearly, Manhattan, there's Broadway to go to, and museums to go to, and speakers, and it's just, there's a lot to do. Um, but it also has the issues that urban places have, right? There is homelessness, and the subway sometimes smells gross, and it's about what kind of life you want to have. There are many colleges, they're out in the middle of nowhere. They usually make up for being in the middle of nowhere by having a very rich um, student life on campus, so you kind of don't miss being able to go somewhere else. But like Amherst, for example, that means that when you do have to go somewhere else, like home, the airport's kind of a ways away. And what do you know, is that okay with you? And of course, there's lots of suburban campuses. Around Boston, there are a whole bunch of campus of universities that are just on the outskirts and a little further away from Boston. And then there's a couple that are in Boston itself. So again, fun with that is that you get to go into Boston to do whenever you want. It's really easy. Sometimes a disadvantage in urban colleges is that people don't live on campus. It becomes kind of a commuter college. And so then it might be that the campus kind of empties out over on the weekends. So think about that too, is what do you want that part of your experience to be? And then look for other programs. Look for, if you want to study abroad, what is their study abroad program like? And importantly, can you do that given the major that you're thinking of? Sometimes if you're doing a business major or an engineering major, either you can't afford to go abroad and graduate on time, you have to pick, or there you can go abroad, but there's a limited number of programs that still support, for example, your engineering studies while you're abroad. So those are just 6 or 7 examples of the basic characteristics that you should think of to create your list. And then the biggest one is, what is your academic interest? Because that's how you're going to have some insight into how the educational part of the university is going to affect what you are interested in. And I'll just give you a quick example. I had a student that wants to literally be a rocket scientist. He would love to work for NASA, but he'll work at any of the uh, rocket companies that are now out there. And he had Stanford on his list. And then he went and researched Stanford, and it turns out that Stanford Aeronautics mostly does satellites, and they do nanosatellites, which I thought was really interesting, just tiny little satellites this big. But he said, no, I want to work on rockets, or I want to work on vehicles that are going to rove Mars or something like that. I'm not interested in satellites. So Stanford was a poor match for him. And he ended up at Georgia Tech, by the way. So he'll be a rocket scientist. So let's talk about the major. First of all, you don't have to have a major to apply. You can absolutely apply undecided to a college, but you do have to narrow it down. Now, the good news is this is not a lifetime commitment. It's just your plan. Most schools don't care what your plan is as long as you have a plan. So if you're going to apply undecided, you're going to say, well, I'm not decided yet, but I'm thinking either A or B or C. And when I get to your school, I'm going to explore them because I see you have all 3 programs, and that's your plan. And that's absolutely great. There are a couple exceptions to that, just so you know. The California state schools, you are applying by major. And there are a few schools like that where it's just you're applying to the major, and if you and you'll either get into that major or not. That happens also with business programs, undergraduate business programs, engineering programs, and often now more and more computer science programs. Business and computer science are the most popular majors, so that's just what's happening. It's so competitive for those that you either get in at the beginning or you can't. Now, that's not all colleges. Many you can get in, you can transfer in, or you can declare your major after your second year, and that's fine. But when I say you don't have to narrow it down, for a few schools, you do. Um, and for example, business schools, if you, this is new at Berkeley, for example, you used to go first year as a freshman and then apply to the business school when you would start at Haas as an undergrad your sophomore year. But they changed that a couple of years ago. Now you either get in at the beginning or you're not transferring in. So just be aware of that. But that's the only exception. The vast majority of colleges, they expect you to change your major when you get there. And most people do. There's lots of statistics online on how many, but it's somewhere between 50 and 70% of students change their major at least once in college. So it's not a lifetime commitment, but you need to have a plan. Um, so that could be tough. I found an approach that works well for me is to go uh, the opposite way. What do you not want to major in? Like, are you any chance you want to do medicine? Okay, pre-med's out. And pre-med's not a major, but that really kind of cuts out things like biology and chemistry. Any chance you want to do business school? Any chance you want to do engineering? And if the answer to those is no, then you can cut your way down to, okay, so now what's left? And there's, if you can search online, there's lists online for the things like the um, top 50 majors. So just go down the list and say, okay, which ones am I sure I don't want to do? Often that cuts it down to just three or four, maybe five that are left that are possibilities. And then you can either take those five and explore them more and narrow it down, or you can say, no, those are the ones that I'm interested in, and I want to go to a college where all five of those doors are possible so I can go explore and do something. Okay, so why all that? This is all having insight to yourself so you can improve your college list. So the way to do that now is you go do on each of the colleges on your original list, you go do in-depth research. Um, And there's lots of places to do it. I'll tell you some of my favorite. But online, for example, I always go to the college website. And I go there because that's going to be an authoritative and best presented image of the school. And if I don't like that one, that does not bode well for the rest of it. And trust me, you will find websites that you go, who did this and when was it last updated? Um, So AI engines often, which is a perfectly valid place to start, um, they will often point to places like Niche and Big Future. And let me share my screen a little bit here. And I think this is right. Oh, no, desktops. Zoom reorganized my. There we go. Share. Oh, right. It's the one labeled webinar demos. Okay. So this is Niche. I like it. They do a pretty good job of giving you gross outlines about. And what I like is, oh, well, here, let's pick something else. Let's search for Rose Holman. This is a good one. I love Rose Holman. Um, so this is what it looks like. They give it grades. So this is their comparison. They try to be fairly objective. I like that Niche always allows the university to put in their own description of themselves, because there you can see, okay, so what are they proud of? What do they say about themselves? Um, Although this one does crack me up because they say, okay, we're number one in small engineering school or number one engineering college in the US. They are, by the way, it's a great, great college. Um, but they describe what else uh, do you do while you're studying at one of the best colleges for engineering, right? Um, and it really gives you, again, this is their best presentation. Um, and they have lots of really good sections. So they look at majors, quick way to find out whether the major exists or not. Although for this one, I would generally, this gives you the popularity of the majors. So clearly an engineering school. Um, but always look at the school website for an update of the department that you're looking at. These websites that are aggregators of information often get out of date. So don't rely on all these. You need to do good critical thinking and research to find out, am I looking at the right thing? Okay, so that's niche, big future. If you go plan for college search, you end up here. I picked, here, let's pick something. I picked well, I'm thinking. So all the majors available, I want to study. I'm going to pick business because that narrows it down because there aren't that many undergraduate business programs. Oh, Ted. Um, so we'll add that. And let's pick entrepreneurship's always fun. I want to do uh, management science, managerial economics. I'm just picking some at random here. So now show me the colleges that have that. And so it came up with 43 colleges. I sorted them here by SAT range from highest SAT to lowest SAT. So I get at the top schools like WashU, Vanderbilt, Stanford, and here's an excellent example of you can't always rely on this stuff. Stanford doesn't actually have an undergraduate business program, so that's not accurate. Villanova, Pepperdine, and then as we get to the down further on the list, we're finding out colleges that are less selective that still have good business programs, but you may or may not have heard of them. So this is a good way to get other ideas. You can find colleges that are similar to the one that you're sure you would like to go to, and find others that meet some of your requirements. In this case, I picked only four-year colleges, and I want it to be mid-size, urban or suburban is fine, and I wanted sand volleyball. So that narrowed it down a lot, actually. Okay. Um, so the other place you can go, um, oops, is to, let me try to share another screen with you. I have too many windows open. Okay. So there are tools available at your high school. I listed four, but your high school uses um, some sort of software to make sure that they organize all the support for sending for sending the information supporting your application to every college that you're applying to. So these are four examples: Naviance, Score, Maya Learning, College Kickstart. This year I ran into another one called Shello, Xello. The good news about using software like this to um, manage the application process is it also tracks who applied where and who got in where and how they got in. Was it early action, early decision, off deferred and then admitted, or sometimes even off a wait list. And so in all of these, there's the capacity to have scattergrams. And scattergrams will help you understand if you'll make that first cut at the college. Now, a huge but about scattergrams. It only looks at two factors, at your grades and at your test scores. In that context, all this software does a very good job of saying, okay, for other people with your GPA in your high school and your test score, these are the people around that you applied to the school, and these are the ones that got in and didn't. So that means that at least you'll have an idea, am I going to make the first cut? Of course, once you make that first cut, everybody that's left has more or less the same test scores and more or less the same GPA. And so then it's all the rest of your application that makes a difference. So the objection college counselors have to scattergrams is that often students are lured into thinking something is an absolute certainty because everybody that had their test scores and GPA got in there, and then they don't. And it was, but the scattergram said, most scattergrams have those exceptions. You'll see them where suddenly somebody with a really low GPA and test score got in somewhere and it's surrounded by red X's that said no one else got in. I'm like, what happened? What did that student have that was so magical? And it could have been just brilliant essays. Could be that it's an athlete or a donor to the school or, anything can happen. And the same at the top right. At the top right, you'll see somebody that had a 4.5 GPA and a 1600 SAT, and they didn't get in. And you just have to wonder what happened there. Like, why? And it does happen. There are students who are in fact, I had one who had very, very good grades, very high test scores, and doesn't get in. And you just wonder what was going on there. So be aware that these scattergrams are not the authority and they're no guarantee, but they are good guidance. You should have, as you're rating your list, particular for reach, likely, target or likely, you should be, at the very least, you make sure you're going to make the first cut. When you look at the scattergram for your likely college, you should be surrounded by green admitted dots. And if you're not, it's probably not a likely. You need to make sure you'll make that first cut. And likely doesn't guarantee you'll be admitted, but at least you're in with a group of people whose application is being evaluated beyond the grades and the test scores. Okay. Oh, one other note on these. So high school, college counselors vary on their opinion of these scattergrams, but the ones that object sometimes will not make them available to students. So if so, generally they will have them available if you go sit with a counselor and go through them. And the counselor will use them as a guide to decide whether it's a likely, a target, or a reach. But they also know they deal with so many students from your school applying to all these schools that they have a good intuition for it already. Okay, so know that if you don't get it when you just log on to whichever one of these tools you have, generally these are made available in spring of junior year. Some schools do it earlier. A few do it not until beginning of senior year. But hopefully you can go ask your college counselor at your high school what tool they have and what when you'll have access to it. Okay, the other one are books. These are two of my favorite, The Fisk Guide to Colleges. They update this every year. It's generally pretty accurate. And I like Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be. And that's also a book that I love because it's about fit. And the college you go to is not about the name on the college. It's about what you do while you're there and what you get out of it. Okay, so let me stop sharing. Go back to me taking over your screen. Stop sharing this too, so I get my screen back. Okay, so those are some tools that are available. The only tool I would not use is Reddit. Well, I'm sure there are other tools I wouldn't use, but Reddit, my students will look at it and, well, in Reddit it said, and Reddit is, as I'm sure you know, notoriously unreliable because any one person can start a discussion and anybody can throw in an opinion about it, whether it's informed or not. And you never know what's behind somebody having an opinion. Doesn't mean you can't read Reddit, because sometimes if you read enough about it, it sort of at least gives you a vibe of the place. But certainly don't rely on one post about a school or especially one angry post about a school. Okay, so you're trying to narrow it down. How do you narrow it down so as you're doing your research and what is it that you're looking for? So I always suggest to my students, look at academically first, because that's often a deal breaker status. So, and for example, if you want an undergraduate business major and they don't have an undergraduate business, well, that's that, right? The example I gave you earlier about the rocket scientist, that was it for him. Um, if you have one of the super common majors, psych, econ, bio, chem, those you'll find at every single college, but they're definitely very different. So right now, for example, I have a couple students looking at biology departments. And some, especially smaller colleges, just have a bio major, and that's it. And others, the larger ones, tend to have, or the ones that really like pre-meds, tend to have a lot more interesting bio majors. So there's molecular biology, there'll be neuroscience, and lots more interesting things that might really make it easier for you to decide, okay, what kind of sub-major concentration do I want? Because if you're interested in neuroscience, for example, that will really cut down the number of schools you can apply to. So think about that. And that's the first thing to look at. And then look within that, either just major or sub-major and slash concentration. Colleges cut them all sorts of things. See what they're proud of. See what they're working on. That's why I love that the Stanford example happened, because he got in to see what they were very proud of, and they were very proud of their nanosatellites and stuff like that. And then he looked and looked, well, are you doing anything with with rocket fuel or with propulsion or materials? And it was nope, nothing, satellites. Um, so he dropped it. Um, then also look, especially if you have multiple interests, look for interdisciplinary programs. Um, the UC San Diego, for example, doesn't have an undergraduate business major per se that's just at Rady, their business school. But Rady partnered with several other departments to have a business spin on the other departments. So there's business economics, for example. That's a joint program between the Rady School of Business and the economics department. They have international business, which is the international, what is it called? International IR? Yeah, I guess it's the IR department and the business school. And then there's also psychology and business. So if you're looking between those two, and then suddenly here's a great program for you. Not a lot of psychology business programs exist, by the way. So that would be an interesting way. But with by major, a lot of, especially with the popular majors, a lot of colleges are the same-ish. But as soon as you see the interdisciplinary majors, then they get very, very specific very quickly. And it will really help you narrow down, or maybe even you find a program that you love that's very unique to one college, and that's the one that becomes your number one. So I will also look at how many faculty are in your area of interest. So again, if it's neuroscience and there's one faculty member doing work on neuroscience, that might be a limited department. On the other hand, if there's a whole group of faculty, there are 10 or 15 or 20 in that area, then clearly they're doing a lot of work on it, and it could be fun. I had a film student who looked at, and I'm not going to remember what college it was, but wanted to go to a film program, but wasn't really ready to commit to a purely film-focused school. So he wanted to have other options and be able to do something different. So he looked at one where the film program consisted of two faculty. It was chaired by an English department faculty, and then the other faculty member was from, I want to say, the Chinese language department. So kind of, and they just put it together because they wanted to have film at the college, but it was just those two. That compared to NYU Film School or USC Film School is a dramatic difference. Look at their research. It's actually kind of fun to look at their research, because you'll look at some of the research that the faculty are doing, and you just wonder, how did you get money to look at that? But sometimes you'll find something that's really, really interesting. And you say, yes, that's a faculty member I would like to go work with to help them do whatever they're doing. Okay, so that's kind of the first step. And I talked about it so much because it really is often a deal breaker, and you should know why you want to go to that college. What is it that you want to do academically when you go there? By the way, if this is summer before senior year, keep notes and keep the links in your document so you can go back to them. For many of the schools, you'll have to write the essay that says, why us? What are you going to do when you come to our college? And these notes that you do to try to make your list can be helpful in getting that essay started, because that essay should be really specific. Okay, so academically, you looked at it, you decided, yep, it has interesting things, and then look at the rest of the school and go back to the insights that we're looking that we were talking about at the beginning, and decide what's most important to you, what's a deal breaker, what's not a deal breaker, do they have it? And the good news is, if you have good criteria, by the time you're doing your research, you know what questions you're asking. Does the school have beach volleyball, for example? By the way, if you look for sports or any club things, when you get to that page in the college website, check to see that it's been updated recently. We're running into a lot of colleges that, yeah, we have an SAE team, for example, but the website for that club hasn't been updated since 2019. So just don't get caught with saying, yeah, they have a club, and then it turns out they don't. Now, that doesn't mean you don't go. It might be, yeah, I'll just start it up again. That would be great. But again, something to evaluate. So you're looking also at other experiences in the school, and are there things there that happen there that you would like to be a part of, that you just go, that would be really fun? Part of it is the basics, Saturday football games and tailgaters. I know at Amherst, there is a football team and they play on Saturdays like every other college, but the stands for the football field are about the same size as my high school was. Not a lot of people go. Compare that to Michigan or UCLA or any of these other big football schools where basically life stops on football Saturday and you go. And that's what people do. So that can be part of college, part of a fraternity or sorority, all those other things that we talked about at the beginning. Does that work? Okay, last then, to make sure, as you narrow your list, make sure you maintain a good balance between reaches, targets, and likely. As I said, if you don't have access to the scattergrams, then go talk to your college counselor at school or to me, and I can help you understand where they are. Those tools can be very helpful. And then I'm going to allow time for questions, but one question I always get is like, well, once I narrow down my list, how many colleges should I have? Generally, I say somewhere between 10 and 15. That's my opinion. And it's mostly because, and it's gone up over the last few years, because it's easier to apply to schools. As soon as we had the test optional, the application count went way up, not because there were more students, but just that students were applying to more schools. So I say get it down to 10 to 15. But that's a very rough range. I've had students that have only 5, and I have some students that just are 20. The 20 and 20 plus generally happens because they're applying to those top 27 most selective schools. And at some point, it does become sort of a roll the dice kind of thing. And the more times you roll the dice, the more likely you are to hit it. Those are generally very high achieving students. And they know that even though they're very high achieving and they have wonderful activities and stuff, we still don't know if there's what their chances are getting in, and chances are they're always low. So that can happen, and that's okay. Then on the other side, I have one student, for example, that was very interested in animation. Well, high quality animation programs are rare. So she only applied to 5 or 6 colleges. And ended up admitted to several of them, and she chose one that she got to attend, and that's what she's doing now. So that worked out. My worry was always with a list that short, are you sure the likelies are likely? We don't want the scenario we don't get in. But in that case, we were highly confident, and it turned out to be true. That worked out. Okay, so that's one question I get asked all the time. If you have any other questions, anyone? just let me know, raise your hand. Oh, we have a Q&A button. I forgot. We'll use that one. Any questions? Okay. Well, then I think we will leave it there. Oh, Tom has a question. Can you type it in the Q&A? It's one of the buttons at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Oh, actually, I can allow you to talk. So Tom, let me allow you to talk. There's Tom, and you're muted. There you go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can
Yeah,
hear you.
yeah, thanks for the great presentation. Could you provide a little more uh, depth to how to balance exactly the
Yeah.
the reaches, the safeties? You know, is it 10% reach, 10% safety, and all the rest in the middle?
Uh,
And also, how should we think about the probabilities of a reach? Should a reach be a 1% probability? And should an early decision school be a 30% probability or a 20% probability? How do you think about that?
okay. Those are both good questions, and I get them often. So thank you for that. Um, so let's talk about the balance in the list. I generally, if we're aiming for 15, I generally like to do 5, 5, and 5. But it also kind of depends. Once you get into it and you see the discipline. So for example, when I got into animation, it was like, okay, well, this is all the schools we got. So that's as balanced as it's going to get, right? And that was it. I just want to make sure they were likelies. So the issue with likelies will be, will they figure out that you're using them as a likely? So if you're a 4.5 student in wonderful activities in 1600 GPA out of a very good high school, and you're applying to Boulder, and there's no obvious reason in your application why Boulder is at least one of your top choices, then they're going to figure out that student is using us as a safety, and they won't admit you. So if there's schools like that, I would keep it at 5. Often we can do much better than that, and we figure out, okay, these are 3 very likelies, 3 is enough. And the biggest challenge with likelies is finding a reason to go there, right? Because imagine the scenario, student applied to 15 schools, only got into the bottom 3, right? And in that scenario, everybody's sad. College counselor is sad, college counselor school is sad, parents are sad, and student just feels like, ah. And so at that point, you want to be able to look at your likelies and say, okay, yeah, sorry to pick on Boulder, but that's just an easy one to find good reasons to go to. Yeah, I'm going to Boulder, but I'm an avid skier and I get to go skiing all the time. Or it turns out that Boulder has one of the most underrated business finance programs in the country. It is very well funded and it's an awesome program. And so, yeah, I'm going to Boulder, but it's an awesome finance program, and that's exactly what I'm sure I want to do. So finding those reasons is actually really important. And that's actually probably the hardest part, because it's easy to say, yeah, if I get into Stanford, I'm going. If I get into Harvard or Yale or Brown or Northwestern, duh, I'm going to go, right? It's not tough. It's the likelies that are tougher. So that's kind of that side of it. The biggest thing is that here's how I think of it. The likely is your 80% chance of getting in, and this will get to the probabilities. The reaches are less than 20 for sure, and if you're doing these top 27 schools, it's like less than 5 for sure, and yeah, 1% is totally reasonable number to have in your mind. And then the targets are everything in between, so I kind of say 50-50. And so when I look at a college list after everything was processed, I would expect it. My goal is to have the student get into half the colleges where the student applied. Often it's the bottom half because the reaches were really reaches and it just didn't happen. But that's where we say, okay, if it's going to be half, let one of them be out of the reaches, or maybe two, and that would be amazing. Um, so think of it that way, and then let's talk about probabilities. First of all, remember probabilities have, or to be statistically valid, need to have random, and this is clearly not random, right? The people applying to Harvard are very different from the people applying to Cal State Long Beach. So it's a self-selected group that already makes the probability very difficult. I would say that for those top 27 colleges, think of them as a 1%. And that's not true for everybody. Obviously, some people are like, wow, what a person. But I have had some outstanding students not get in. In fact, I got one got into Stanford and didn't get into any of his other reaches. Thank God he got into Stanford. That was awesome. But it's you just don't know, because those groups are so self-selected and so elite that you don't know. And let me just give you some numbers for elite. There are 2.7 million. Actually, no, let's go this way. There are 37,000 high schools in the US. Every single one of those has a valedictorian that has a 4 point something GPA, and if didn't score 1,600 near on the SAT, it's close. 37,000. All the Ivy Leagues, Duke, Stanford, Northwestern combined take 27,000 students. So that means, sorry, 25,000. So that means there's still 12,000 valedictorians that graduate at the top of their class that don't get to go to any of those schools. So that's why it's a 1%, right? Now, clearly the quality of the school makes a huge difference, and colleges don't take only valedictorians, at least those elite ones. They really try to create a balanced class, but and how they do it, you just don't know. It depends. I had once an admissions officer at Barnard said, by the way, she was giving a talk to a big group. By the way, if you play the harp, come up to me afterwards, because we need a harpist next year. And it was and you need to be good. You can't start playing right now and then apply as a harpist. And that's just luck. Yeah, I happen to pick up the harp, so here I come. And there's always something like that you just don't know. So I would say then for those top few, think of it as a 1% chance. And if you get in, you just scream in the light and enjoy it. After that, it is easier to tell. And so I actually, instead of having all targets are 50-50, I actually create 5 categories, and okay, this is better than 50-50. I mean, something would have to go pretty wrong for you to be unlucky and not get in, but it's also not 80% chance of getting in, right? So it's kind of 60-70, I don't know. And the other way as well. It's like, this is not entirely a reach. So for example, for any student, I say, Stanford is a reach, Harvard's a reach. There's no way that's a better. Now, and what I do then, now, among the fact that it's a reach, yeah, you're well positioned. You will make the first cut because you have grades in the test. But after that, it's just luck. But you're not going to get cut. I will tell a student, and almost every college counselor will tell a student, you have 0 chance of getting in, and like, don't bother applying. Don't waste their time either. But after that, if you make that first cut, there is a chance, and it's always 1%, 2%. ED, which is a key question, does change the statistics of admission. And so let's not call it probability. But with most Ivy Leagues, if you apply, well, I shouldn't say most. So Penn, Cornell, and then other schools that are in that category, Vanderbilt, not Stanford, Northwestern. If you apply early decision, the percentage of students that get admitted out of the early decision pool is generally 2 to 3 times bigger than the regular decision pool. And let me give you a specific example, because the director of admissions from Duke just gave a talk on this. So last year, Duke got 4,000 applications that were early decision. They admitted 800. So that's about 20% admission rate, which at Duke is, wow. Those 800, almost all of those go. That makes sense. It's early decision. It's half the class of 1,600. So there are only 800 spots left after that. Regular decision, they got 40,000 applications and admitted about 2,400 of those. So the difference is very dramatic between early decision and regular. So yes, that definitely, at least at Duke and several other schools are like this, that are those most selective ones. The probability, if you're just saying if they just threw everything down the steps and see what got out, is higher. So the admission rate is clearly higher. And there is an explanation for all of it, right? Part of it is especially at D1 schools or in the sports that really matter to the school, athletes go. Less so, but huge donors also go in that category. And then in that same group, say the Duke 4,000, there were also a whole bunch of people that said, if I apply regular decision, I have zero chance at Duke. So I'm just going to throw it out there, especially because I don't have to submit a test score, and see if by any chance they admit me. And so there's definitely a group in that. So a student that is already highly qualified that's going to make it into that pool is competing with an even smaller pool that excludes the athletes and excludes the Hail Marys. So yeah, it is very wise, very important to choose an early decision school that, and if you can, apply there, and early decision makes a big difference. However, don't game it. If you really want to go to Berkeley, then don't early decision anywhere. You don't want to, and early decision to Boston College, get in, and then you find out you could have gone to Berkeley. So that kind of, well, let me pause there. I see your hand up again. Go ahead. You can unmute, Tom. Does that help?
Yes, thank you for the odds of ED. Also, what probability would make sense to choose an ED? If you really want to go there, is 20% in the Duke example a good probability, whereas a 1% chance is wasting your ED, and an 80% chance is also wasting your ED?
Perfect. That is a very good way to think about it, right? So like ED to Penn to Wharton, I have some students that really want to go to business school, but I can tell them there's zero chance you're getting to Wharton. Don't ED it to hope that a miracle happens. Like miracles don't happen. You need to make that first cut. And I can tell that student's not going to make the first cut. So there are absolutely scenarios where, and I go by that first cut, that's where those scattergrams really help. If you ED and in the scattergram, you're surrounded by red dots that were denied, you're not a miracle. It just doesn't happen, right? I mean, every now and then it is a miracle, right? I've had a world-class skater got into places where otherwise she wouldn't. I had a world-class donor that got into places that he probably wouldn't have. But if you're one of those, you know it. So I think the way you're thinking about it is good. If your true first choice is offers ED, absolutely. Same thing with your second choice. We have ED1 and ED2. ED2 is specifically designed for your second choice school because ED1 deadline is November 1st. You find out mid-December for the most part. And then ED2 decision is right at the beginning of January. And so places like Tulane, if you did early action, not ED, and they'll probably defer decision on your application. They admit very few early actions, but they take a whole bunch of EDs. But then when they let you know that they've deferred, they ask you, do you want to change your application to ED2? Because they're saying, did you get into your first choice since we were only EA? You clearly were not your first choice. They're basically asking, were we your second choice? If so, sign up for ED2. We'll tell you in 2 weeks. So Tulane admits a huge chunk of their students from ED1 and ED2. So I hope that answers the question. Is that work? You're still on talking if you'd like.
Yes, yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. And Tom, for your questions, appreciate that. And please let us know if we can help in any way.